Thank you, Todd, and my colleagues on the panel. It's a pleasure to be out and visiting and seeing all the graphs and the charts. One thing to remember when you hear that term, the drought of record in the 50s, 1950s Texas didn't have 25 million plus people living in it. So we, in our role in the legislature and the governor's office, have to look at many other things other than just volume and dealing in acre feet or gallons per minute or any of the various things that our scientists that have been displayed by the charts and the maps have seen. We have to do more with the policy aspects of it, our reaction to, and what it means to our economy. We're already seeing, one of the big things that the governor has kind of keyed his longest serving term as governor that we've had on is the number of jobs that we've been able to produce, and there's a lot of reasons for that. What we're countering right now is now other states that are somewhat jealous of our great state, they're actually using water somewhat against us. Michigan recently put out something, don't move to Texas, they don't have any water down there. Well, I think we can show them that we do and that we're acting upon it. As was mentioned, the mid-90s, we began formulating a new 50-year plan for Texas. By the late 90s, the plan was passed by the legislature. It's a plan that's wonderful in nature. In fact, many states have used Texas' 50-year water plan as somewhat a model of how you ought to plan for your needs out for the next 50 years in your state. I'd love to tell you, being a former elected official, when I actually knew everything there was to know, that this was a brilliant brainstorm by Buster Brown and myself and our colleagues in the House. The only smart thing that we did in that whole exercise of that piece of legislation was, in fact, for the first time, divide the state up into 16 planning regions and have people in those regions that represented various stakeholder interests for water actually formulate the plan. In other words, it wasn't crafted by the legislature, that never works. It wasn't crafted by a single bureaucracy in Austin, Texas, that has served us well over time. I mean, that's why we have the vast majority of the water supply attributes that we have in this state. But by utilizing the expertise back home, if you will, we were able to formulate a plan that is going to carry us now the next 37 years of our existence. The problem that it has, and if we made a fatal flaw, and when you're in a planning mode, it's just like you do every day. You go to your closet and you look at everything that you've got in the closet and ask, what am I going to wear? Here's all my possibilities. Well, this is what essentially we did. We said, if you want something funded, it must be included in the plan. What that caused at the time was an exercise, a wonderful planning exercise, in that we ended up with 541 projects. In the year 2000, the cost was $98 billion for those. Now here we are 13 years into it. The fatal flaw is growing larger. The fatal flaw of the plan was we still have no way to pay for any of it. Chairman Brown, when he had it, tried one methodology, didn't pass. When I had it, tried another methodology, couldn't get support for that. Kip Averett, when he had it, tried another methodology, still no way to pay for it. So what it has caused us to do, and working with our Water Development Board of late, we said, okay, we got 37 years left on this plan. albeit some of those projects should have been started 13 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. What really can be accomplished in 37 years? So we've asked them to go through the exercise of taking all the 541 projects, of which a little over half of those projects were on the supply side. The others were on the necessary infrastructure to be able to use the water after we've developed the supply. And we said, in reality, what really can we accomplish? We hated to use the federal term, shovel ready, but we kind of started there and said, take a closer look now at all the 541 projects, and let's be realistic about what we can do. And maybe that's where we need to start in finding the solution to pay for any of these plans. Well, that list, the preliminary list that we've obtained, has been whittled down from 541 to, in reality, about 21 projects. After we look at, as a for instance, in the current plan, there's 22 reservoirs. In 37 years, we're never going to build 22 reservoirs in this state. As was mentioned on one of the slides, O.H. Ivy took 33 years start to finish. The other one completed just before that. That was completed in 73. One right before that, Lake Texana, took 28 years start to finish, and it was permitted in 2 phases. So they don't have to go back and get another permit. They already got it. But it took 28 years start to finish. So in 37 years, how really possible is it to build 22 reservoirs? Well, it's not. At a reservoir construction cost at the low end of $1.3 billion, how many really in reality are we looking at? So the Water Development Board and TCEQ and other interested parties, our university and academians, have looked at it and said, in reality, maybe 3, at the most 4. If you throw in Allen's Creek, we haven't started on that yet, since most of the money is already there for that, is anybody's guess. So we look at those things and it pares down, say, okay, if we build 4 reservoirs, that will increase the size of our capacity. And the infrastructure to support those, the supply and distribution system, the treatment system, what are we dealing with? And what are we going to do about it this session? There are several bills that have been introduced by various members throughout the state of Texas there in both the House and the Senate. But generally, I think the consensus is you and I, the people of this state, a couple of years ago approved what we refer to as evergreen bonds, $6 billion worth of bonding capacity that we all as voters voted for. Not a penny's been spent. Not a bond has been sold. Main reason is the legislature has not approved or apportioned or appropriated 1 penny of debt service, so the bonds are just sitting there. So in the governor's call in the State of the State of utilizing some of our rainy day fund for water projects, and knowing that even if we took the entire $12 billion out of your and my savings account, that's what the rainy day fund is, probably wouldn't make a dent. If we took all the money out of it, the $12 billion, and put it toward transportation, another major issue in Texas, especially in our energy development counties, probably wouldn't make a dent statewide. So we're into that mode as policymakers of establishment. How far can we stretch whatever dollar that it turns out to be? Well, if you take the $6 billion and you apply some of that rainy day money into the debt service, you can actually, there is a multiplier effect when you're utilizing bonds, And what the agency has told us, what bond people have told us, don't ask me. My wife keeps our checkbook. But we understand we can build close to $41 billion in projects with the $6 billion in evergreen bonds if we apply the $120 million a biennium for debt service onto those, and hopefully that our bond rating will maintain strong. We'll get good return on that, and we can sell those bonds and get started on some of these projects. So they're looking at several different ways, your elected officials there in both the House and the Senate, and working with our office to try to facilitate and, if you will, get the ball rolling on some of these projects that are there. Obviously, you've got some innate problems. Permitting process alone on a reservoir takes a while. You've got interest groups that don't want any reservoir constructed for any reason, that have to be overcome and worked out and compromised with and go that extra mile. We looked at unique type of situations in building those reservoirs. As for instance, some states out west of us have considered about giving current landowners within the territory or units of government within the footprint of a reservoir an equity interest in the reservoir. That's an attempt to try to offset some of the time it takes to acquire the footprint on that land and reduce the opposition to one going in from that standpoint. But as we work through various policy issues, a lot of things goes. The old saying about in Texas, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting, is always an adage when you're talking any type of water policy. In the current plan, we made the statement that it's a legislative finding that the best way to regulate groundwater in Texas is with a groundwater district. We were opting on local control. That was when we only had just at 40 groundwater districts. Now we have over 100, some good, some doing the job, some crooked moves that we've had to go back in and kind of shake them up a little bit. By crooked move, I mean when you get a board that is, for the most part, absentee owners that come in and control by developing a historic use pattern when people's land have been in what used to be called the old soil bank. Now it's in reserve and you're getting federal money for it, and they don't have any historic use from the period that the board selected. They've lost all their water. It was going on in 2 of our counties that we had to step back in and get a hold of that situation. So we're watching a lot of things as far as policy issues on the water front. I'm often asked about desal, and that's part of the plan. You know, desal is a proven technology. I'm often asked, well, why aren't we doing it? We've got the Gulf of Mexico, an unlimited supply of water. Forget the temperature. We've got an unlimited supply. Why aren't we developing that? Why aren't we doing that? I said, well, there's 2 big reasons. What's the first big reason? That's the first big reason we Texans are spoiled rotten on what we pay for water currently. Desal's a little more expensive compared to groundwater or surface water. The other thing is the energy cost, and that's tied to the expense. Well, we're looking at, in fact, one of our river authorities, the GBRA, Guadalupe Blanco River Authority, is looking at a process. In fact, University of Texas at San Antonio and Texas A&M San Antonio are working jointly on a feasibility study Instead of the old model of how desal operates, where you have an operator or an owner of the plant, and he buys power from an electric company, and then he leases space or builds a pipeline, and part of the cost of the energy for the electric company is what he has to pay for gas. They're looking at taking advantage of what's going on in the Eagle Ford. That's most of the location whereby the GBRA operates, partnering with, and I'll use a name as a placeholder, I don't know who they're talking to, but Chesapeake for gas, Reliant to build a small megawatt generating plant, and Anadarko Pipeline to do pipeline and transmission of water. And instead of each one making money off of their component part, they will partner together and all make money off the sale of water. They feel they can reduce the price down and make it competitive with what they're seeing for ground or surface water. One aspect that we've also talked about, any reservoirs that would be built from this point forward will not fall under the interbasin transfer rule that exists in the current state of regulatory structure in Texas. Interbasin transfer rule, I don't know if you're that familiar with it, but quite frankly, it was put into the current plan really in response to O.H. Ivy. A particular state representative from San Angelo put that little clause in there, and our brethren from over the East Texas area were worried about a water grab from their reservoirs, Toledo Bend or Sam Rayburn or Livingston or any of those areas that had not been contracted, moving water over to Lubbock or to San Antonio or even El Paso. And so they adopted an initiative called, or a statute, that's the interbasin transfer rule, that says essentially if you have a water right off one of our rivers, say in this case the Sabine River, and it's the senior-most right on that river, that meaning you're going to get your water before anybody else does, and you're not using all of that right, and you say, I can make some money. I'm going to sell that right to San Antonio. Under interbasin transfer rule, that right becomes the most junior right on the river. Now, if you're in San Antonio, what would you pay for the most junior water right on a river coming out of East Texas? You know, if I'm buying water, I want to buy it when I can use it, not when I can use it or when they have enough for me to use, or all the way that junior water rights work. So in effect, it rendered all the water unmarketable that we have, even if you develop a surplus situation in any of our reservoirs. We're saying if we're going to spend these dollars on these reservoirs, again, let's get the most bang for the buck and be able to use that. It may be built here, and as long as they're supplied, but also if they have surplus, they can use it over and get what it costs on a market and go from there. So those things, I'm not telling you that's what's happening. That's what's being discussed right now as far as trying to spread the resource that we have in Texas. I can tell you, in working the many years I did on water regulation and formulating water policy, the hardest thing to do is, in conditions that we have right now, and all you people have taken your valuable time to come to this forum, say, what are y'all doing there in that pink dome? Fix the problem. And they're getting hard fixed. You get it all, everybody is down the road, and then it rains like hell. And you can't get anybody to do anything. That is the most frustrating part of developing water policy. I gotta have it. I want it. So it was almost like the chosen people leaving Egypt out in the desert. starving for water. And then water was provided and they went on to something else. Well, that's what happens when you're developing water policy. So my message this morning really is it is very serious with members of the legislature because they do come from all parts of the state. Every part is under this, as our charts have shown us. We've all been affected. The Elephant Butte issue out there is not just hydrological. It's also, we've been in a fight legally. In fact, we sued the U.S. Department of Interior a couple of years ago over what was happening. How that operates, snow melts in Colorado, it's collected in the Elephant Butte Reservoir. Third of the water stays in Elephant Butte, another third goes to New Mexico, and we get the other third. Well, what was happening was New Mexico was taking the 2/3, using it, and pumping it back in to us as reuse. We said, wait a minute, no, that's costing us a lot more. We're getting hosed on this deal. So we sued the Department of Interior and we won. Well, the Department of Interior then gives us the 2/3. We get first use of it, and we can send it back to New Mexico. Well, now New Mexico is back suing us again. So, or not suing us, but suing the Department of Interior that affects us. So we're back in the courthouse on that. So you've got a lot of these things and aspects that are existent. It's not just looking out there and seeing a great place to fish, or taking a cup and having it treated and you can drink. There's a lot of innovations out there besides desal. I will tell you this one, I don't know how profitable they're going to be, but they've come to see us. They are called toilets to taps. I said, you might want to change your name. But okay, they produce that by going in and recycling and cleaning up that. It's just a marketing ploy that I don't know is going to work for them. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Look forward to your questions, I guess we'll be able to take.
I think we have a couple of minutes. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Do we have a couple minutes, Lori, for questions? So does anybody have any questions for the panelists? Yes, sir.
Is there any, talking to the last speaker, is there any looking at future wetlands like John Walker Sands wetlands in place of reservoirs?
One of the things I mentioned in the construction of a reservoir, one of the hardest permits to get is that federal permit. It's all an environmental permit, and wetlands being somewhat of the centerfold or the poster child of all the various Sierra Club, environmental defense, all their deals, protection of the wetlands. You would not be able to really take those unless you had some approved mitigation plan for those. That's the four that I mentioned don't include really the acquisition of any, quote, wetlands, if you will. I'm sure you can go out and at any given time, you can point to any piece of property and say, well, that's got a wetland on it. But when you're dealing in a reservoir, it's a lot longer. But building, well, the mitigation, yes. Yeah, any of these are going to require some type of mitigation aspects, and that's one of the requirements that we do have. We're seeing this also with industry in Texas. The petrochemical industry down mostly along the coast of Texas found, instead of fighting them, if they would develop a sound wetlands plan and develop this, it would benefit not only them, but it would assist the creatures and critters that inhabit wetlands and the quality of the water as it's filtering through and what wetlands do the best and those type things. So we're seeing a mindset change from even the 50s, even the 80s, into now the the new millennium, where they're embracing the concept. And yes, a lot of this, in fact, they're offering that as the first step in their mitigation plans.
And if I could add, up in North Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth area, there's a couple of engineered wetland facilities where they take treated wastewater or water from the reservoir, run it through the engineered systems, and then pump it back up into the reservoir then for drinking water supply. So I know those are out there as well.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
It seems in Texas that private property rights are something of a convenient aspect. And if I'm a landowner that is, say, putting a proposed reservoir, why should I have to give up my property just to supply water to, say, all those people down the stream who don't conserve, who don't control their development, who don't control their population?
That sounds like a question for the Water Development Board.
Well, one of the, thanks, Todd. This kind of relates to the interbasin transfer rule, where there's a requirement there to even get the permit that somebody that goes after that water has to show that they've, I forget the exact word, the highest practicable level of water conservation. So there's a strong incentive for water suppliers that want to go build a reservoir to use their water locally as efficient as possible. Now, of course, there's different viewpoints on what's the most efficient. Some would say if you have a lick of St. Augustine in your yard, you're not using your water most efficiently. So that's going to be subject to interpretation, but there is an incentive there to conserve the water, use the water more efficiently than perhaps it's being used now.
Lori is waving her hands, telling me that we have reached the limit of our time, and it's time to go into a break. But I'd like you all to please help me thank our panelists.